so much history and science behind what this might be.
It's kind of moving around a little.
And parts from me were found and thrown in with my son.
Calling boo hags the most dreaded creature in South Carolina folklore.
Is it supposed to be getting closer?
I don't know.
These spirits are drawn to this beautiful blue, and they get trapped inside, and when the sun comes up, the bad spirit, the haint, will be destroyed.
And they appear to be moving extremely slowly.
Again, this has been reported for generations.
Am I really seeing this? What is this?
And I've been working in the field of documentary filmmaking for 4 decades now. And one of the things I enjoy the most about being a documentary filmmaker is having that opportunity to sit down and talk with people. I started out wanting to be a documentary filmmaker focused on the natural world, animals. I worked for the National Zoo for a little while, and I was heading in that direction of being a biologist or a zoologist. But somewhere along the line, I fell in love with telling stories about people and why don't we get along, sharing our differences and celebrating those differences and those cultural differences. And in the process of being a documentary maker, oftentimes I would leave with a story to tell or a story to share. And oftentimes along with that, it would be a recipe as well, that people will break bread with you and they would share their lived experience. And I started collecting those stories and became a storyteller about 30 years ago. Oftentimes, because of colonization, a person's history is lost. You know, we know the story of colonizers. The first thing they would talk about is burn the books, destroy a person's history so that you can turn them into the peasant or the serf or the enslaved. But storytelling in many cultures around the world survives because of that shared story of a grandfather sharing it with a granddaughter, and that granddaughter was shared with her children, and so on and so on. So I love storytelling, and many people are asking me, is that story true? And I'll tell them that, yeah, there's a lot of history within those stories that people aren't aware of. And that's what I love doing mostly as a storyteller, is sharing those connections back to West Africa and how it connects with the Deep South, like Charleston, South Carolina, Beaufort, South Carolina, Hilton Head, working the whole Gullah corridor is filled with those stories, that history, the food, the way people worship, that directly connects to West Africa. You know, it's nice to be able to go out and be part of a storytelling festival, be invited to a school and share stories with children, or coming out to a senior center and having a moment to share stories. Oftentimes when I'm working with seniors, not only am I sharing a story, but I'm taking the time to listen. They're very eager to share their story or that version of a story that they were brought up on. So it's been a joy to travel in many parts of our nation and share something as simple as storytelling. You know, that's a lost art form that is hanging on. In many cultures, storytelling is still very, very vital. Native American culture, storytelling is very, very important. It's a way of learning, and it's a wonderful way of teaching. One of the things that I did was study the griot form of storytelling out of West Africa. The griot, or the Jale, or the Jale Muso, is the female storyteller. But that Jale form of storytelling, where you are teaching through storytelling. And many West African stories are connected and rooted in fact and history. You might use an animal, you might use a tree, but that tree oftentimes is a representation of something that was very real. I do a lot of food history, and I'll break bread with people around a table, and I'll cook a traditional West African dish, but I'm able to talk about how that West African dish made its way into the American South and how it transformed how we eat, how we live, how we've survived. And I'm able to have a deep conversation about some of the things that they refer to as critical race theory, but it isn't. It's just having a conversation about history. And storytelling over a plate of food is a wonderful way to have that conversation and put people at ease. And people aren't arguing. They're doing one of the most important things that you can do, and one of the most important aspects of storytelling is that ability to listen. That's one of the hardest things that we can do as people, is that art form of listening. And that's what I love the most about storytelling. There's an Irish culture, there's a French culture, there's the German, there's the Spanish. All of that is important stories to tell and share those stories. And that's kind of how I stumbled on the bottle tree.
So, Charlie,
Yes, Michael.
we've talked about boo hags,
Yep.
and we've talked about lands and light.
Yep.
Let's talk about another Beaufort County, South Carolina tradition that can be seen elsewhere in the Southeast as well, and that is bottle trees.
Yes, bottle trees.
So are you familiar with bottle trees?
Yes.
Okay. Just in case, I'm going to describe bottle trees.
Yeah, I mean, I know. Give me the rundown.
All right. So
I know the nickel version.
Okay, a traditional bottle tree is a dead tree or one that has had leaves stripped off of its branches or some of its branches. And it has been adorned with blue, chiefly, and sometimes green glass bottles that are like stuck over those limbs so that they form a bottle tree.
This is distinctly more organic than the rebar that
Yes.
I'm picturing.
So sometimes these days you'll see them like made of rebar, or they're made of other metal, or they're other kinds of trees. But historically, they were made using crepe myrtle, especially.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And
And got
the
that nice flexible branches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The idea is that the bottles, because they are shiny and colorful, will attract spirits at night. So those spirits,
I mean, they attract people during the day, so.
yeah, those spirits may be on their way to the home where the bottle tree is on display to do evil work.
I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna get you. Oh, look, a tree. Made of bottles.
Shiny. So we talked in the Boo Hags about how they would like send spirits against people to carry out their malicious work. Well, bottle trees were designed as a defense against that.
Like the old Japanese beetle traps, except for
Yeah,
boo-hag spirits.
exactly. Or other kinds of evil spirits, or to capture like disease spirits, things like that.
Okay.
So those would come along at night, they would see the bottle tree, they would be fascinated. As soon as a spirit touches one of the bottles, it gets sucked inside, and then it's trapped. Exactly. That is exactly the sound effect in my head.
Moving down to Charleston from the Washington, D.C. area, I remember seeing bottle trees when I was younger, driving with my parents on the backcountry roads of Maryland and Virginia. And my mom would say, oh, those bottle trees are there to ward off evil, bad spirits. And I didn't see bottle trees much in the Washington, D.C. area. But when I came down to the deeper South, I started to see the bottle trees kind of pop up more often, especially in the deep rural areas, where oftentimes one's connection to their spirituality, the way they worship, their superstitions, you might find the bottle trees more so in those areas that are less metropolized, more country, more laid back, holding on to those traditions and not wanting to be part of the big city. And I started to do that deep dive into the history of the bottle tree and discovered that the blue bottles are a way to keep away bad spirits, haints.
So they get trapped inside, And then one of two things happens. Either a practitioner then removes the bottle and corks it, and then can use that trapped spirit in some way, either to send it against someone else, or to use it as like a battery for a magical spell, something like that.
Weaponization of somebody else's spirit.
Absolutely. Or they're just left in the bottle until the sun comes up, and then when the sun strikes the bottle, it burns the spirit away,
Like gremlins.
like gremlins, and the spirit is gone, and then the tree is available to be a defense again the next night.
Trees clear.
It's like self-cleaning, self-maintaining.
And I bet the little spirits get talked to by the big spirits saying, that's why you don't go touching other people's stuff.
Well, we talked about like, don't go with the kids who are doing bad stuff.
Yeah.
There you go.
Don't go touching other people's things. Get sucked up in a bottle. Turn into a battery.
That's right.
You want to be a battery? Didn't think so.
Maybe some kids, I don't know.
I'm going to be a battery when I grow up.
So where do bottle trees come from? They are another part of Gullah culture and are strongly associated with the Gullah people.
Okay.
The reason being, and it all goes back to a different part of West Africa from the part that we talked about in the Buhags episode. In that, we were talking about like West Africa regions where rice is grown.
Right, yes.
Bottle trees come from a different part of West Africa.
It's a pretty big continent.
It's big. And they come from a place that was called the Kingdom of Congo.
Mm-hmm.
And it was on the Atlantic coast of central West Africa. And really the word kingdom is that's not the right word for it. Because really the Kingdom of Congo was an empire. It was a very powerful, advanced culture.
Did they have a king?
They did have a king.
Okay.
And
It was just huge.
Yes, it was large, it was powerful, and it was politically powerful also. It controlled a number of client states around it.
Okay.
They were all smaller kingdoms. This was a very technologically advanced society. They were very socially advanced. They had a very complex social structure. Their king was actually not a hereditary position. It was an elected position.
Okay.
They had a body made up of leading citizens, nobles, people who were leaders in their communities, and that council, we'll call them, were sort of the legislature of the Kingdom of Congo. And when an old king died or retired, then that body would elect the
They got
next
to
king.
retire.
I read the term die or retire. It's possible that retirement was a form of death. I don't know.
Yeah, interesting. It's just not something you often hear about in older societies. And then the king voluntarily stepped down.
Maybe that happened. I don't
Maybe.
know. That was the phrasing that I read. Was die or retire. But that legislative body would elect a new king to serve as the next head of state. I find that part of why I find that so fascinating is because that's such an advanced cultural concept and way to organize a government. So the Portuguese were the first European power to encounter the Kingdom of Congo.
Okay.
And when they got there, they found a really advanced society with a market economy, ready to do trade, like ready to greet the world. As part of their relation with Portugal, then the Kingdom of Congo was forced to start doing hereditary kingship because European powers really couldn't figure out how this whole democracy thing worked, or this representative democracy thing.
What do you mean, legislature? I just say what it is.
Yeah, they wanted to have a system of government installed in the Kingdom of Congo that mirrored their own.
Okay.
And this was also the beginning of people from the Kingdom of Congo being captured and taken and enslaved.
Okay.
So, in the Kingdom of Congo, however, there was a long-standing cultural practice of taking blue glass vessels or blue pottery, and sometimes green, but again, mostly blue, and hanging them from the exterior of homes or from trees in the yards of those homes as a protective measure, exactly as bottle trees are used by the Gullah people and in the rest of the Southeast today.
Yeah, because they're, I'm not going to say ubiquitous, but they're very common.
They are. You see them in the South a lot.
Right.
And that practice actually has been traced back to the 9th century CE in the Kingdom of Congo. The Kingdom of Congo was a very old culture. It's important to note there's archaeological proof that that region had been inhabited in an organized, structured way since 600 BCE.
Okay.
But by 900 CE or AD, they were using what are now bottle trees as a common cultural practice, a folk magic tradition of defending against evil spirits. And in fact, the Bakongo people were the largest ethnicity of the Kingdom of Congo. And the Bakongo had a belief that crossroads were spiritually important.
Which definitely carries over into even like modern folklore.
Oh yeah, totally. The tradition in the South of the idea that the devil meets you at the crossroads, that is a direct importation and translation of a belief from the Bakongo people from 1200 years ago.
Interesting.
Yes. So I like how I just said, yes, that is interesting.
You are correct to be interested. Now listen to more.
One of the things they did with crossroads, though, was they would hang up also like especially shattered blue glass or blue pottery.
Okay.
That was considered to be especially spiritually powerful. And they would hang that up from the trees at crossroads because that would ensnare and trap spirits that were using the roads to travel between places as they went about at night doing malicious work.
These spirits are very practical.
They are. They're
Using
They
defined
use roads.
roadways.
They've got a schedule. You know.
Wow, they really have it together.
But so
Now
that,
it's all haunted dolls and weird stuff.
that practice, though, got brought over to the New World by those enslaved people from the Kingdom of Congo. And there are very early writings reflecting this being practiced in what's now the southeastern United States. There are documented descriptions of bottle trees being in place in communities in South Carolina as early as 1776.
Take that, England.
That's funny, England will come up in a little bit. And there are also really detailed descriptions of it from 1791, from some texts that I read. And in that, there are descriptions that even incorporate some elements of hoodoo or conjure, where, for instance, like grave dirt might be added to a bottle before it's placed on a tree in order to make it even more potent.
Okay.
Things like that.
Amplify that battery.
Yes.
Turbocharge.
The specific use of crepe myrtle, though, is like very traditional among the Gullah people,
Okay.
and for a very specific reason. In the Old Testament, when the Israelites leave Egypt at the end of their enslavement, they celebrated by having a 7-day festival. And that is now part of the Hebrew holidays of the year. And it's a harvest festival. In 2023, for instance, it'll happen in late September, early October. But it's one where they celebrate with food and togetherness and remembering their liberation from Egypt. And as part of the original festival and as part of its observation now, they would build huts or like booths out of specific trees. And one of those was myrtle.
Okay.
And there's crepe myrtle in the South.
Close enough.
And so people who had been brought here as enslaved people would use myrtle trees to make bottle trees. And it was a way to encode a couple of different things. They were using the elements of Judeo-Christian belief that had been imposed upon them to say to each other, one day we will be free like the Israelites. They were encoding a message of freedom and a hope for a better future, but wrapping up in something that could seem innocuous to people who do not understand the cultural significances. And I find that really fascinating. Bottle trees are specifically a way for enslaved and marginalized people to talk to each other about a better tomorrow.
And catch spirits.
And catch spirits.
It's multifunctional.
It is. It's like, again, kind of like boo hags, it's very much a part of that hoodoo practice.
Swiss Army knife.
Yes, multi-purpose.
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 Bad spirits are drawn to that blue glass and they get trapped inside the bottle and they can't escape. They're mesmerized by the brilliant cobalt blue that oftentimes you'll see in a bottle tree, like the one behind me here, and they can't get out. And when the sun comes up in the morning, the rays of the sun will destroy the bad spirit or the haint that's trapped within the bottle. And I thought that was such a beautiful story, to think that if we put blue around us to protect us from evil. But then as a documentary filmmaker, you want to go deeper. You want to find out why the color blue. And I started to do research and look at what African cultures, why they celebrated the color blue. And as I did that deep research, I started to realize that that symbol of blue is all around the world, actually. It's not just in Africa. It is all throughout the Mediterranean, different parts of Europe. In Greece, they will have blue buildings to ward off bad spirits, to keep a peace and calm. Domes of buildings oftentimes are painted blue. You might have a blue stripe going around a building to protect that building. You'll find turquoise, not just the cobalt blue, but you'll have turquoise and many different shades of blue throughout many cultures and tribal cultures of all types, that the blue symbolizes, again, another form of protection. Blue stones added to a weapon, to the hilt of a sword, to protect that person going into battle. And when you look at even going into more pagan rituals, it was believed that the blue water, bad spirits could not and did not want to cross over blue waters. The sky is blue, and many people believe that the sky is blue, that blue is protecting the earth, is wrapping the earth up in that blue color to protect it from any evil. It's kind of a version of heaven when you think about it. So blue has been used all throughout the world for centuries as a talisman or a belief to keep away evil. And of course, through West African culture and the enslaved coming into South Carolina and all up and down the southern East Coast, there's that belief of painting a porch blue. That way the bad spirits won't enter your house or your threshold or the door, the windowsills. So it's not just the blue bottle on a bottle tree or tying the bottles to the limbs of a tree with twine. The blue is oftentimes used in the color of paint. And so there's a wonderful, rich folklore that is attached to the bottle tree and the color blue that I think is quite fascinating. And you'll find it throughout many, many societies.
In all cases, whether it's the practice by Gullah people and enslaved people talking to each other about freedom, or whether it's the more sort of modern use of it, sometimes as a more decorative feature in communities that are outside of those practices, the preference was for cobalt blue, in part of like cobalt glass, in part because it was believed that cobalt glass had healing powers.
Was that because of how it was made or because of the color?
Yes.
Correct.
I think the answer is yes.
Okay.
Partly, the idea was that glass itself physically had healing powers. But I also think partly it's about the color, because these days we don't get cobalt glass anymore. But one theory is that cobalt glass was made using lime, and it is possible due to its chemical nature that it like gave off chemicals by being in the sun, and maybe those chemicals drove insects away, things like that. Yeah. So maybe there was like an observed power of like keeping mosquitoes out of your yard if you had enough bottle trees.
That's going to take a lot of bottles.
It's going to take a lot of bottles.
We've already talked about the mosquitoes in Beaufort.
But we've seen places where there are a lot of bottle trees. Yeah. The other thing though is that the blue from the cobalt blue glass used in bottle trees is part of what gave rise to paint blue being a protective measure against spirits. So this is all like tied together.
It's all.
Yeah, I find it really interesting.
All connected.
There are places where you'll see, and this is especially true in Appalachia today, where you'll see multicolored bottle trees. And generally that's an indicator that that is one that was designed by somebody who was just outside of these cultures entirely. Yeah. Or that they are part of the diaspora that has moved into Appalachia, where the practices have changed somewhat.
Sure. We've talked about that a little bit when you have dispersed groups pocket cultures emerge, and
Absolutely.
there's things that are unique from hop to hop along the map.
Yes. One of the things that I studied a lot in my Appalachian Studies coursework was that basically there is no such thing as one Appalachian culture. Appalachian culture is sort of a big Venn diagram. And what happens in one holler might not happen in the other. And much like that way on the Sea Islands, what happens on one island might not be how it's done or believed or related on another. So,
I mean, there weren't even bridges connecting them
no.
until the mid-20th century.
Yeah.
So I was a firefighter out of high school. I learned to weld in high school, and back in those times, firefighters didn't make any money full-time. I started working part-time as a welder, and that's where I started picking up welding trade and learning, the trade of welding. I worked with a really nice older man that taught me how to bend metal, how to work metal. And then about 14 years in my career, I fell through a floor in a house fire. Got hurt on the job, got tired of sitting around feeling sorry for myself. I watched something on TV and I was like, oh, I could do that. So I started teaching myself blacksmithing. I went from an 8x8 canopy in my backyard to what you see here. Accomplishments, I have 2 pieces in the State Museum. I have works of art all over South Carolina, parts of Georgia, North Carolina. I've made bottle trees before. Because there was a need. It seems like everybody in the South wants a bottle tree in their yard. They're pretty to look at, and I didn't know the history behind it until I started looking into it. I found several stories, but for the most part, it's to entrap spirits in the bottles. But from artistic side, not everything has to be so straight and so perfect. So you get to kind of be abstract with it, be loose with it, and be fluid with it. The first one I made, I had a bunch of leftover rebar, which is a construction material. I just took a wrench, bent the longest piece I had in different directions to make it kind of look like a tree. And then I added short sections as I felt necessary, and just kind of blossomed from there. So finding a need for it, it was something relatively easy to do. However, carrying around bottles all the time wasn't it was the hardest part to do. I started, whether I was selling them or not at festivals, I'd always get stories of, my mom, my grandma, my aunt, my uncle, whatever. I had a bottle tree and I always loved it, and one day I'll have one, or I have one now, and, I'd like to add it to the collection. Biggest thing, everybody asked me where to get the blue bottles from. They're like almost impossible to find. And this is my bottle tree, non-traditional bottle tree without the bottles. But this is a spiral, so each bottle will go on here in a spiral. And it looks pretty amazing with all the bottles on it. So I started with rebar, and I made a simple scroll off a jig that I had built. And I was like, that'd be pretty cool if we did a bottle tree out of that. And then, trying to figure out the math on each individual post. And it was just something I dreamt up. I was like, it'd be pretty cool if it'd be something a little different, instead of the traditional bottle tree, if we had something a little crazy, a little, out of the box type design, something a little different. I don't like anybody to say, well, you copied my stuff. I like being my own, doing stuff on my own. It's just washers. I needed something to hold it, to hold the once you put the bottles on it, to hold the weight so they didn't pull apart. Rebar's pretty flexible when it comes to as far as steel goes. So I just thought it'd add a little design feature and made it sturdier.
An interesting thing, though, you mentioned the English. There
Go on.
There is a practice called witch balls, which are glass spheres. And those are also usually blue or green, and they are hung from homes.
They took them from us.
And are used as a protective measure.
Feels like they were like, lost the country. Taking the witch balls.
It's actually considered possible that the English saw bottle trees and thought,
I was just making that up.
no, but that's actually one of the theories
Okay.
for where English witch balls come from,
Okay.
is that they saw bottle trees and said, that looks cool. But a different thing in English culture was the use of glass balls on fishing nets. And fishing nets are something that get taken out into the water, dropped into the water, brought back up, and there's food in them. And so like all of that adds up to a belief that fishing nets and things associated with fishing nets have power. They kind of have that liminal space power of they go out into the place that's beyond the horizon, and then they come back. And when they come back, there is plenty in them, or there's not plenty. And either way, maybe that reflects, right?
There's doom in them.
Maybe that like reflects the intention of higher powers, things like that. So there's a lot of ways for a belief about the power of things associated with fishing nets to like get hold. And those glass balls on the edges of fishing nets became witch balls that people hung from their homes as a way to catch spirits. And there's not a lot of evidence one way or the other for like which influenced which, except that we know. I like that, yeah.
Which influenced which balls.
But we know that bottle trees come from a much older culture.
Yeah, that's easily identifiable.
We know that comes from 9th century Kingdom of Congo.
Let me make my jokes at the English's expense.
Okay, yeah, no problem. Have a ball.
I'm gonna.
I'm a little ashamed of that one, but
That was good.
But I said it anyway.
That's good.
But I like the
I'm proud
idea
of you.
that, thank you. I like the idea that those are an instance of two practices like reinforcing each other.
Yeah.
And I also like that in the course of doing some reading up on this, I saw a 19th century example of a text, a piece of fiction, in which someone is describing a family hanging Christmas ornaments on a Christmas tree. And they are referred to as witch balls.
Wow.
And so it is possible, if you connect enough dots on a long enough line, that bottle trees from 9th century Kingdom of Congo, Kingdom of Congo, the bottle trees from the 9th century Kingdom of Congo are one of the things that led to Christmas ornaments today.
Specifically those reflective balls.
Yeah.
That every family in America that celebrates Christmas has had at some point.
Yes.
The ones the Grinch breaks. They fall right off the tree. That's sad.
But yeah, there you go.
As I mentioned earlier about the blue bottle and the bottle trees, that like I have one here, a bottle that these spirits are drawn to this beautiful blue and they get trapped inside, and when the sun comes up, the bad spirit, the haint, will be destroyed. And so over the many years, unfortunately, what happens is that these wonderful stories start to get watered down. And it's great that you're doing this documentary to kind of preserve folk tales and stories. Because, like I said, there's history within there. And over the years, you start to see less blue on bottle trees. You start to see folks doing a variety of colors. I tend to like to make certain that my bottle trees and the bottle trees that I've donated to different organizations, I always try to make sure it has a larger percent of blue in order to preserve that heritage. And I'm amazed at how many people are oftentimes going, I've never heard the story of a bottle tree. And when I share that with them, they go, I really love that. I like that idea. I'm gonna have to get me a bottle tree now to put it in the house. So, you know, understanding that folklore, it's not a bad thing. I mean, what's it gonna hurt? The one thing that I always like to tell people when you look at folklore, especially folklore from marginalized cultures, whether it's African, whether it's the Irish, whether it's Eastern European cultures that have struggled to find a place, especially in America, they bring their stories. And it's important to nurture those stories because, like I said, this has turned more into ornamental. Paint companies now have a blue color that's called haint blue, or gullah blue. You know, there's kind of an appropriation that's going on to make money, to have that particular blue on your porch, especially in Southern homes. And so now it kind of loses the history and it just becomes an object to be able to sell and profit from. So now that you've heard this, hopefully you'll take that story and share it. So if you paint your porch blue, there's no proof that the blue wards off insects. That's how the story has kind of evolved. I've had people tell me, oh, you paint the porch blue because it keeps mosquitoes away. Down here, you know, that's the state bird is the mosquito. And then I kind of go, wait a minute, I've heard different, that enslaved individuals would paint their porches blue or the thresholds blue or put blue bottles in their garden in order to keep bad spirits away. And so you can see how sometimes the stories will start to get watered down and get changed. And so it's good to do that deep dive and that research as you're learning about anybody's story.